Please tug lightly on this bowl of mine.
Good evening. I'm Coulter Wonkite. I'm already into the 420, damn it.
What are you doing? Nothing? Why not?
Trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.
You like music, you like weed, well, we gonna be good friends indeed. This is not much I like more than smoking trees. They'll make you dance the do-si-do and teach you how the chiva grows. Smoke a bowl on the 420 radio show. On Lifestyle Radio.
And yes, it is. This is Lifestyle Radio and the 420 radio show on 420radio.ca. How's it going, eh? Marcel told me that I sound real Canadian.
Yeah, with your boot.
I was out in a boot today.
Boot in a boot.
I was out in a boot. You ever been out and about, Bob?
I always like to go out and about. I even have that on my phone when I am out and about.
Out and about.
All right, so that is the voice of one Dr. Robert Melamede, and he is here to talk to us in the way that nobody else can talk to us. Because this man is the man, as far as I'm concerned, because I've been following this dude for a very long time, watching, and we were chatting just before the show, and Lenny is here as well, but he's kind of bummed because he has to leave. He's got a big meeting. So I wanted to touch base on what you guys were talking about, because you said something that was actually quite pertinent.
You're talking to me, Lenny?
Yeah, you, Lenny. Leonard.
No, what we're talking about is, if anyone hasn't seen the Facebook post, did Bob put it up himself, or was that you?
I put it up.
Whoever put up the link, the video, it's amazingly accurate, which was cool. Like, yeah, that was awesome. But when I was watching the video, I was blown away how old the video looked. And what did we find out the date of that video was?
2006.
Which is utterly shocking. That's 17 years ago. Like, that's how far ahead of the curve this gentleman is. So that's what I was so blown away with.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this stuff, Bob?
Well, I started consuming cannabis when I was 16, and it right away felt very right for me. I've always been very ADD, so even though I managed to succeed always in school, it was always like I was never plugged in the right way, because I didn't think in the normal linear way that was expected of you if you're going to succeed, in school and through college, etc. So I managed to adapt more and more by consuming cannabis and getting stoned and learning how to adjust.
I'm sure you don't remember, but I have a kind of a story. I have ADHD. I was a case study from 5 to 16. They gave me a choice of going off the Ritalin and Dexedrine. I said, yes, please. And my doctor said, are you smoking pot? And I said, no. He said, well, if you start smoking pot, stop taking the pills, because it'll do the same thing. Do you agree with that?
100%. My son has got a similar loosely wired brain as I do, and he found out that CBD was incredibly beneficial for him to really introspect, like getting stoned, but also to gain kind of the focus and control his emotional status to a much more stability. So, yeah, it's miraculous for people in so many different ways.
Well, I can concur. I know 2 young college kids with a bit of ADHD using CBD, and again, this is through their parents, and I was just helping them dose it, and by far, they both, the parent and the young adult, both student agree that they are performing much better in school because of it.
I work with a radio host that suffers from it, and I only survive because he uses cannabis. How's that?
Thanks, Marcel. I love you too,
Actually,
buddy.
he's only alive because he uses cannabis.
I'm using it right now. So, yeah, I think that, in where are we now? We're in 2020. Okay. I'm 56 this year. So I'm not good at math, but I was 16 years old when I had that conversation with my doctor. All right.
40.
So 40 years ago. And I've gone back on Ritalin as an adult. It lasted a little while. It was more to help me with appetite suppression and depression and all that stuff that goes on with ADHD.
You should have sold him for pot.
Shut up, Marcel. Now, here we are, 2020. I'm not sure if you've been on the show since the legalization thing has been going on up here. I think you've been on since it's been legal down in Colorado, though.
I'm actually in Vermont.
You're in Vermont, okay? But
Yeah.
So what's
That's why he's nice and close to us.
what's the law there?
The law here is 6 plants you can grow in your backyard. You can't sell. Hemp is legal, and people grow hemp, and they got a 1% legal limit within the state. So people, are much more happy, but people want to be able to buy and sell it as well, especially it's such a tourist state that it's absurd that, New Hampshire's legalizing, Maine's legalizing, New York's going to eventually, Massachusetts has. So
the garden state can't grow it.
You can grow it, you just can't sell it.
Well, then, yeah, they should.
Nice.
But it's a garden state. I mean, come on, you could have a lot of gardens.
I agree. Well, no, it's only one per household. 1/6.
No, I mean, if they legalized it for sale and stuff like that, you're going to need a lot more than those little gardens.
So you're
going to need a lot of big gardens.
You can grow it, but you can't sell it.
Right. Which, if you grow enough, you can get a year's supply in. But a lot of people can't do that, and a lot of people need too much. You got cancer. It's hard to do that with 6 plants. It's ridiculous,
Yeah.
2 flowering and blah, blah, blah,
Do they have a medical program for Vermont?
They do, but the medical programs are always retarded. In general, people around the country, when you look at it, prefer the black markets over the legal markets.
It's no different in Canada right now either.
I know, because the governments interfere.
Well, no, in our country, they've taxed us so much that patients can't afford it. So we get sales tax on top of an excise tax.
Yeah, they interfere with the flow of freedom.
Yeah. So the black market has 73% of the market share in Canada because they don't charge tax.
Well, though, this is really all by design, because if you look at the arrest, the nonsense that goes on, I don't know the numbers in Canada, but I'm quite certain they're similar. There's not been a dramatic reduction of arrests, cannabis-related arrests, maybe half in some places, and in other places it could even be higher, because what they've done now is they arrest you for violating regulations. Basically, cannabis prohibition is and always has been welfare for law enforcement.
Right. Easy money.
It is. They rob us. It's another way that the intrinsically cannabis deficient, Nazi-minded pigs that run the world can squeeze the life out of the people that have to power the greed and the imbalances of the upper elite, the hoi polloi, so to speak.
There's a word you don't hear very often. Hoi polloi.
You're just wondering where I came from,
Do you think that when you first started getting into the whole cannabis thing and now, do you think the mindset has changed enough to allow this to happen down the road?
Well, I look at everything in an extremely holistic fashion. And for me, what that means is that you start at the base of everything. So for me, the base of everything is the flowing energy that creates life, and then how life manifests itself as evolution, and how evolution manifests itself as humanity, and the nature of how humanity has created what we call social and technological progress, and what that all really means from a point of view of what is the cannabinoid system doing, since it homeostatically regulates everything in our body from conception until death. So there.
Lenny,
Yeah,
what do you think?
I love homeostasis. That's all the body tries to do, sir.
Yep. So the underlying way of looking at the cannabis phenomena is that it turns out that from a point of view of physics, the type of physics that serves as a foundation for our biology, it's all based on equilibrium. So there's a problem with the concepts that are merged from a physics based on equilibrium, because the biology is essentially impossible. If you took the probability of creating one protein that was 100 amino acids long, it would be 1 out of 20 amino acids 100 times. And that number turns out to be a number larger than the number of particles in the universe. So how is it then possible to have created not just one protein, but a cell? So, on the one hand, we have that conundrum built into our physics that has also, as its basic principles of quantum theory, a reversible time. And yet experientially, our time is not reversible. It's always going in a direction. We get younger, we get older, we drive our car and the gasoline goes down. It doesn't ever go up. The egg cracks, it never uncracks. So we have an innate sense of the arrow of time. And it has to do ultimately, from a physics point of view, with an increase in entropy. Entropy must always increase. But that's in an open, when you're dealing with open systems like us, then unique things can happen. And the physics that embraces those unique things was created by Nobel laureate Leah Prigogine. And basically what it says is that flowing energy organizes matter. So when you have flowing energy organizing the matter on the planet Earth, then after 4.5 billion years, you can have matter that can speak to one another over the net and have a conversation. That's all we are, is a manifestation of organized complexity driving the chemical in the chemistry set called the planet. And it turns out that quite incredibly, as evolution proceeded and went from simple bacteria to more complicated single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms, where I'm going with this is that flowing energy literally squeezes complexity. It squeezes evolution as long as there's more energy to flow. And what happened is it developed to the multicellular invertebrates, and a certain level of complexity was achievable. Octopus are complex and smart, blah, 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 but they couldn't go beyond a certain level of ability to flow with and interact with the environment that provides the necessary negative entropy that's extracted by flow-dependent structures, which is what all life is. We extract negative entropy, organization, from the environment in the form of the flowing energy that organizes matter. So by the time vertebrates were reached, something new happened. You see, well, if you just think about it, you have one cell, okay, and then you start the next level of complexity would be to have a clump of cells. But once you have a clump of cells, then you have cells that are on the inside and the outside. So now you have cells that are different already, right? So there's, or intrinsically, a different nature of what flows in ultimately from the environment to provide the sustaining negative entropy. Basically, look at us. If we don't eat and get rid of our wastes, we die. We are flow-dependent structures. And it's the physics of flow-dependent structures that I've extended to biology. And when you do that, that's what I've been doing for the past few years, is learning what that means. And I've come now to really mind-blowing conclusions. And that's what I'd like to share, because they're so mind-blowing that my mind is blown. I have nothing to do but to share it then. And what that is we live in a world that's DNA-centric. And in that world, we have, these wonderful sequencing techniques, and we can trace back life's evolution, and we can see that something different happened when you transited from the invertebrates to the vertebrates, where the clump of cells, as we look at the evolution of invertebrates, the clump eventually formed an indent. That was a head and a mouth and an anus at the same time. Eventually, that formed a tube that became an anus on one end and a mouth on another end, and that's formed a mouth first. Those were called proteostomes. And that's what evolved in complexity to form the various lineages, the evolutionary lineages of the invertebrates, and we could trace all of the DNA sequencing. And then vertebrates formed, and something new happened. And at that point, the organism was formed ass first, not head first. And that became the vertebrates. And that's where you have the bones evolving and the skeletal system, and the passage from the brain through the skeletal system, and all of the bilateral symmetry and blah 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 blah. It also turns out that the whole pattern of how the organism evolves, differentiates, is now different than previously. And it turns out what drove all of this, what provided the additional energy to drive this newer level of complexity, from my twisted, insane, cannabis-centric point of view, is that the CB1 receptor first emerged with vertebrates. And what the CB1 receptor really does, you see all the bullshit these experts talk about is nonsense. All they're doing is identifying little specific pieces of a story without ever looking at what the story really is. And the story is that flowing energy organizes matter, flowing energy creates change, and the CB1 receptor regulates flowing energy by regulating calcium channels on the mitochondria. So on a subcellular level, we see it regulates energy flow. And then when you look through the layers of complexity, what does the CB1 receptor do? Gives you the munchies, the source of the flow, okay? Well, let's go back into the mitochondria. Think of a leaky hose. If the hose is open on one end and you open the faucet on the other end, even if the hose has pinholes, it's not going to really leak because it's going to be released out the end. But if you closed it, then it'll start leaking through the little pinholes. Or if you open it up too much and you couldn't flow out enough, it would start leaking. That's how the mitochondria work. Think of the input as the food you eat, and the output is the things you do, the exercise you do, and the leakage are the free radicals. And you want to minimize that because free radicals react with everything and change the organization of the flow. So that's the whole deal here, is that flow is organized. You have flow-dependent structures that only exist as long as the flow is dissipating potential. And a really nice way to visualize that is to think of the water in a whirlpool in your bathtub. It dissipates the flow dissipates the potential of gravity until it reaches the bottom. So you drain from one tub into another. Once it was all in the bottom tub, there's no more whirlpool. but the whirlpool only exists as long as gravity drives it. So what you see happening is, from a statistical point of view, impossible. Statistics would not tell you that you could have zillions and trillions of molecules that would spontaneously organize to form a whirlpool so they could more rapidly get rid of the potential. But that's in fact what happens. And that's in fact what we are. And that's in fact what life is. And in our case, what we do is we take reduced hydrocarbons, the same things that we burn to drive our cars or heat our homes, and we eat those hydrocarbons that we call carbohydrates, and we burn them. But when we burn them, they can be burned in general in two different ways. They can be burned in a way using the efficient electron transport system that's regulated by the CB1 receptor, and that drives more and more complexity. And that drove the evolution of the human brain. It drove the evolution of the vertebrate brain, to the point that the success of the enhanced flow and the complexity that was therefore then generated created a new demand to deal with the extra free radicals. And that new demand was the CB2 receptor. Because what is that doing? It turns on fat burning. And unbeknownst to our doctors, because they're not taught about this at all, there's a fundamental difference when cells burn fat versus when cells burn sugar. When they burn sugar, they can use the electron transport system and make energy efficiently, but dangerously, because if there's too much of a leak, it disrupts the flow's harmony, the psychedelic biochemistry within the cell. It disrupts that to the point that the cell triggers a reinforcing catalyst of disaster. Basically, it kills itself with free radicals. That's called apoptosis. In order to avoid that, a cell goes through a series of metabolic rearrangements. It turns on aerobic glycolysis, which feeds most cancer cells, and ultimately it turns on fat burning and turns off the sugar burning and the carbohydrate burning in general, meaning the electron transport system, as well as the aerobic glycolysis, also known as the Warburg effect, and burning of glutamine and other sources of energy in favor of fat burning, because fat burning is when a cell recycles its pieces so that it can survive anything. And at that point, it actually changes its DNA.
Anyway, sorry, Bob. I gotta go, guys. But this is exactly the crap I love, boys. Marcel knows I love the mitochondria and electron transport. I have to run. This is awesome, guys. Yeah.
Lenny, you should just take your phone and just play this feed. So
I can't. I'm gonna listen to it later.
Date.
I'm at a bar and there's a band. I can't. Anyway, nice to meet you, Bob. We have to connect again.
Good evening.
You guys too. Bye.
All right, talk to you. Bye. Oh yeah, he's got music.
And there goes the superhero we know as the pharmacist.
So, I hate to babble on, but it's such a coherent picture that it's hopefully something that people are able to follow, because where it goes is incredible. It goes to really empowering humanity.
Well, there's a reason why it's here. There's a reason why it's available, and there is a reason why it works.
Well, and there's a commonality of what we observe. On the one hand, for the variety of illnesses, we see people from all different illnesses benefiting in one way or another. And from a mental point of view, people always call it getting high or turning on. Well, that's what they are literally doing, you see, because your brain requires and loves to have efficient energy, because your brain is the forefront of the unfolding of the creative energy that made you. That's your interface with the outside to absorb the new information that's available to enhance your flow.
I wish we had a bonfire going right now.
It explains everything, Al.
Yeah.
It does. It blows my mind, because it does explain everything.
Because every time I get high, I turn on knowledge shows and just soak up knowledge.
Yeah, I watch a lot of stuff like that too. But when I haven't had anything in a while, right, and especially in the morning, you have that first one, and if it's the right strain, and you can feel your body powering up.
Yep.
At
You
least
can.
I can. And it's like, sometimes you take that haul and you're like, and then you're just like, doom, 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 doom. You can feel it going from your brain down to the tips of your toes. Now, with somebody that has pain from diabetes, neural pain in that, and it makes a big difference.
Well, where I'm going with this is that you have to expand the statement that you just said in many directions to come up with something that's actually quite dramatically different conclusion than what you just said, essentially. And that is, you see, it's the flowing energy that creates us. And it's the balance between driving our ability to carry out differentiated functions like, our heart rate, our nerve transmission, our kidney function. All of those things love to use the electron transport system because that's where the efficient energy is made. But again, any imbalance creates free radicals, and any excess free radical production beyond what we can naturally handle winds up disrupting the system, okay? So when you consume too many carbohydrates, your cells naturally do things to prevent the damage. And when they can't handle that because you are eating too much carbs, then they basically say, screw you, because you're not smart enough to deal with their reality. So what they do is they then turn off the ability for the cells to burn sugar. That's called diabetes. It's simply the cells trying to stay alive in spite of your bad eating habits.
Yeah, now I'm depressed. Thanks, buddy.
Well, and that's what leads to the neuropathy, because the nerves become inflamed.
Yeah.
The immune system is all inflamed. I've had terrible neuropathy on my legs, and with numb feet and swollen toes, and gout and blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
You can control all of that because you are what you eat.
Yep.
And if you have any fat on your body, you're consuming too many carbohydrates, and your body is turning the excess carbohydrates into fat rather than burning the carbohydrates and making too many free radicals. It's your body trying to protect you. But that protection leads to diabetes and heart disease and Alzheimer's and cancer.
Everybody's typing away.
So this is why this is important to understand what I'm talking about.
For some, it's like, yeah, it works. That's all I need to know. Right?
Well, but
No, I wanted to know why.
That's not going to optimize your ability to take advantage of the opportunities that are provided by the knowledge.
Of course. Every guest I have on the show, I learn something and I take away from that. You know what I mean?
Well, essentially what we have is that distance from equilibrium is what health is. Equilibrium is death. So what we want to do is maintain our distance from equilibrium and reduce our movement towards equilibrium, which would be a far from equilibrium phase change back to a lower level of organization. We still wouldn't be at equilibrium, but we would no longer be alive as the collection of cells that constitute us. Bacteria would still be there, and they'd eventually run out of energy, and the chemistry would eventually run down, if it was in a box. But we want to maintain distance from equilibrium. So what I'm suggesting is that it would behoove us to learn what that means for each of us in order to slow down and reverse our aging process with respect to the weak points that are naturally a function of our genetics and our environment, epigenetics.
Wow.
Darcy's just sitting there stunned.
It's very empowering. And it
I
works
am actually.
mental as well as physical illnesses.
It really is probably one of the most diverse plants on the planet, huh?
Well, because it regulates both the carbohydrate burning with CB1 and the fat burning with CB2. So with CB1, it can drive our creative interface, our consciousness. And with CB2, it can help restore the balance necessary to keep us alive, as long as we don't ignore that happens to be the basis of our health. Right there, that's it. Everything that's good for us enhances basically our ability to recycle and to move ourselves further from equilibrium. When you're young, before you reach adulthood, you have two things going for you. You're growing physically and you're growing mentally. So you've got the flow. The only thing that can flow into you is mass or energy. Well, all the mass that flows into you is monitored by your immune system. And all the energy that flows into you, your sights, your sounds, blah, 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 is monitored by your nervous system. And both of those are totally controlled by your cannabinoid receptors.
I guess that's why you get that tingly feeling right off the bat, eh? Like it's all connected.
You get turned on, and it is your continuity with the environment that is you. It is God, generalized open system dynamics, the flow of energy, totally regulated by the endocannabinoids and supplemented by phytocannabinoids from the plant. All the illnesses that it helps are nothing more than nutritional deficiencies, and no government has the right to tell us how much food we can grow in our backyard. Fuck them.
Hear, hear.
Fuck them.
Hear, hear.
I agree.
This is why, Al, after I got off of the medication and just used cannabis without the medication, I started gaining leg function.
Before you go on to that, Darcy, explain, because you have not had a conversation with Bob. Explain the situation to Bob so he understands more.
Mm-hmm.
I was hit by a tree in 2001. I was working in the woods, and a tree fell on my back and crushed my T8 and T9 vertebrae and left me an incomplete paraplegic. And for the first 5 years, they had